La 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 la. Let's check the facts. How have we gotten to the point where prisoners are in the position to demand special treatment regardless of the crimes they committed? Apparently, Idaho must provide gender confirmation surgery to a transgender inmate living as a woman for years, and has been cruelly made to suffer by being put in a men's prison, as he was born a man. The 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals stated that denying surgery for the 31-year-old Andre Edmo is considered cruel and unusual punishment, which is a violation of the 8th Amendment, which we will get into towards the end, because at this point the 8th Amendment is being abused and misused. For Edmo, who is now a saint and a savior prisoner, whose crimes just flew out the window, it's a win, according to her attorney. Edmo is relieved and grateful that the court recognized his basic right to medical treatment. So getting transgender surgery is now a basic right in medical treatment. On the opposite end, however, guess who's going to be paying for this? That's right, taxpayers. According to the statement, the surgery is contrary to the medical opinions of the treating physician and multiple mental health professionals. But here's a statement that really got to me. Edmo is seeking monetary damages from the state and its contractors for violations of his constitutional rights when he was denied surgery. So this guy is a sex offender, and we'll get to what he did later. And yet, when he is in prison, he demands his constitutional rights. But the thing here is that when you become a criminal or a prisoner, yes, you do have certain rights, but they are very limited. You don't get a wide variety of rights like everybody else in the free world does. You committed a crime, that crime is punishable, and you must pay for it. And yet from prison he is making demands, and when it agrees with him, he uses the Constitution as a shield in order to make everything sound very legal and serious. So what did he do? In 2012, he was sentenced to prison for sexually abusing a 15-year-old boy. Also in 2012, the prison psychiatrist diagnosed him with gender dysphoria. Now, I'm not making any accusations, but it sounds a little too good in timing, especially a month later, being in prison, to be diagnosed with something that a lot of people will feel sorry for and back him up on. Just saying. At some point, he tried to castrate himself. And of course, an attempt like that usually leads to a faster decision to make sure this guy gets what he wants. He's been requesting surgery, and when he didn't get what he wanted, he decided to sue. Forget that 15-year-old boy. I mean, what an inconvenience. Let's just put his problems on the back burner and his family's problems on the back burner. If they ever decide to sue or take him to court, it doesn't matter. Right now, the most important thing is that a sex offender gets his surgery, because Edmo has been ongoing in extreme suffering and medical needs. And the saintly court went on to paint a dark and gruesome picture of the evil prison authorities by saying that the responsible prison authorities have been deliberately indifferent, and keeping him from getting surgery is a violation of the 8th Amendment, which clearly prohibits cruel and unusual punishments. There was a similar case back in 1990 where Cheryl Koselek has been found in her car strangled to death. Cheryl's husband was the suspect and was convicted of her murder, killing a person, taking a life. However, he too was accommodated in prison as a criminal, because somehow he too had gender identity disorder. Ruling was in his favor that Koselek was entitled to taxpayer-funded treatment for the disorder. So a prisoner who killed his wife is entitled to taxpayers' money so that he can get surgery to become, not a guy. His treatment included hormone therapy and electrolysis, which, by the way, that means getting rid of hair. So taxpayers would have paid for him to get all his hair removed. So he sued again because he believed that surgery was medically necessary for his care. Forget that his wife was murdered. Her care is nothing. That too has become a nuisance, so we're going to put that on the back burner because his care is more important that he become some woman, girl, anything but a guy. He believed that he is a female cruelly trapped in a male body because God is evil and he is cruel, and he apparently makes people suffer by putting them in the wrong bodies, which is saying that God doesn't know what he's doing. So he also had 2 suicide attempts and tried to castrate himself, which of course moves his case up to priority, putting everything else in the past as unimportant because his life and sanity need to be saved. So what exactly would this cost? These are just estimates. I didn't do serious research on this because I already did a video on transgenders a while back. giving more in-depth cost. So beginning with housing inmates, it costs about $40,000 a year. The state of California has seen its cost per inmate go from $47,102 a year in 2009 to over $95,000 a year in 2017. The federal prison budget for 2018 is estimated to be $7.1 billion. Now these are the costs for trans surgery. You can pause and look for yourself. I'm not going to go through the numbers, but it's staggering. So not only do taxpayers have to pay to keep inmates in prison, anyone who does something drastic like try to commit suicide or castrate themselves to get that attention on them and become a priority now also get free surgery for themselves. The English Declaration of Rights of 1689 is the source of the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. When the declaration was issued, however, fairly gruesome punishment was meted out as a matter of course. For example, dozens of offenses included those as minor as grand theft were punishable by death. America's adoption of the ban on cruel and unusual punishment took place within a similar context. The men who wrote the Constitution were aware of the harsh colonial practices such as repeatedly plunging low-level offenders underwater. That was unusual and cruel punishment. So, in order to put this in perspective for you guys, let's take a look at what real cruel and unusual punishment is, and then compare it to what we just talked about. Now, this website had pictures, and of course everything is in the description box, all my sources as usual, but I can't show you the pictures because even drawn out, they are pretty nasty. So, we're just gonna go through this really quick, starting at number 10, death by 1,000 cuts. And it wasn't banned too long ago, 1905. It was a punishment reserved only for the harshest of crimes, such as treason and fratricide. During this procedure, sharp knives were used to kill the criminal, gradually removing portions of his flesh over a long period of time. The victim was tied to a wooden frame, usually in public place, and the flesh was then sliced from the body. The limbs were gradually amputated, followed by ears, nose, and genitals. After 10 to 20 minutes, the victim was decapitated or stabbed in the heart. Opium was sometimes administered as an act of mercy. Number 9, sawing in half. The criminal would be hung upside down and would be sawed in half all the way to the chest and head. But most of them were sliced up to their abdomen to prolong their agony. And because they were hung upside down, the brain was receiving sufficient blood flow to keep them alive and conscious until the saw finally reached the main arteries in the abdomen. This kind of execution could last several hours. Crucifixion. The criminal's hands and feet were bound or nailed to a wooden cross-like structure. It was a capital punishment reserved for slaves, traitors, heretics, and there were different methods for this too. Usually the prisoner had to drag the crossbeam or the cross itself, which weighed about 100 pounds, to the place of execution. So by that time, he was very tired and could not fight back. Death would usually happen because of exhaustion or heart failure, and to speed up the process, the legs would be shattered with an iron club. So that would cause asphyxiation and the prisoner would die. And of course, many people know this was the route that was used to kill Jesus, so not taken lightly. Boiling. Number 7. The criminal was stripped and thrown in a cauldron full of boiling liquid, which was then heated to the point of boiling. The liquid could be water, oil, tar, acid, wax, wine, or molten lead. An alternative was using a large shallow pan containing boiling oil, tar, or lead, which is kind of like frying a person to death. Number 6. The Catherine wheel. The criminal was tied to a large cart wheel with his arms and legs stretched out. The wheel was then slowly revolved while the executioner smashed his limbs with an iron hammer, heavy metal bar, or even using another cartwheel, breaking the bones in many places. After the bone shattering process was complete, severed limbs of the person were woven between the wheel spokes. After the execution, the wheel was often placed on a tall pole so that the birds could eat the body of the sometimes still living criminal. It could still take up to 2 or 3 days to die. Number 5, impalement. Dracula comes to mind. The criminal was forced to sit on a thick, sharpened wooden pole. The pole was then slowly raised upright, and the criminal was left to gradually slide further down the pole only by his or her own weight. Vlad Tepes, aka Dracula, did not care if you're a guy or a girl, you got impaled. The pole then emerged through the victim's chest, shoulder, or neck. Sometimes it could take days for the person to die. Vlad the Impaler reportedly executed more than 80,000 people this way. Number 4, flaying, which is also skinning alive, was the most gruesome execution method ever conceived. The Aztecs of Mexico often flay their war prisoners during ritual human sacrifices. Ancient Assyrians, which is now modern Middle East, used to do this too. The executioner would gradually cut off the skin using a knife, starting at the face, or the prisoner would be severely burned and then the skin would peel off. Number 3, rat torture, used in China, was a method where rats would be put upon the victim and the victim would be eaten alive. At the beginning, large pottery bowls filled with a couple of rats was placed open side down on the naked prisoner's body. Large amounts of red-hot charcoal was then piled on the top of the bowl, gradually heating the air inside. Rats, terrified of the heat, would slowly gnaw their way out through the victim's flesh. Number 2, brazen bull. The bull was hollow, crafted entirely from bronze, and it had a door in one side. The criminals were locked inside the bull and a fire was set under the statue. The fire heated the metal until the criminal inside died from severe burns. The scorched bones were then often made into bracelets and sold at the market. And number 1, the boats. With this, the criminal is contained inside a pair of narrow rowboats, which is like a large wooden tub, with his head, hands, and feet protruding outside from this container. The person was then forced to ingest large amounts of milk and honey until developing severe diarrhea. The mixture of milk and honey was also rubbed on the exposed parts of his body, attracting flies and other insect species. Then he was left afloat on a still pond or lake. The defenseless person's fecal matter slowly accumulated within the container, attracting more flies, which ate and bred within his or her exposed and increasingly gangrenous flesh. So it doesn't matter if you're a guy or girl. Person was then repeatedly fed each day to prevent fatal dehydration and starvation, often prolonging the torture to several days or even weeks. Death, when it eventually occurred, was caused by a combination of various factors, most often because of septic shock, starvation, or dehydration. And no joke, some of these types of tortures are still used today, but in Yulin, China, on dogs at the meat festival. So you guys be very aware. I made a video about this, how people in Yulin in China are still doing this to dogs because of this stupid belief where the meat will taste better the harder the torture is, and it brings some sort of luck. People in China are fighting against this. The president won't listen. A lot of people won't listen. The people in Yulin are mental, and I'm not even going to be nice about this because you just can't be. So just something to be aware of, that this is happening to those poor animals because of these sick people. So for those of you who love animals, you can do something about this, sign petitions, be a part of this. If you guys ever do decide to and look at the pictures, I warn you, they are graphic and horrific. For those of you who don't care about animals, it doesn't matter. This is not a custom. So just be aware of this, that it's happening to these poor innocent animals. Now, compared to true cruel and unusual punishments, would any of you say that not being able as a prisoner to have surgery you demand to turn from a guy into a girl, is that cruel and unusual, or is this taken way out of proportion? Not having a flat screen TV in prison is now cruel and unusual? They're lucky they even have toilet paper. And I bet it's not even generic. I've only got one word for these people: marshmallows. This guy's gonna be out in 2021. Nobody is saying don't get the surgery, just don't do it on the taxpayer's dime. It's easy to take advantage when he knows that he can, especially for free. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Make sure your notification bell is turned on so you can get updates for new videos and answers to your comments.
Educate yourself!